come on in and spend some time with the Film Hobbyist. My name is Lydia, and I love movies. I'm sitting in my basement on the weight bench we've been using as a seat since our desk chair broke 6 months ago, reading a script off a desktop monitor, talking to you through a pop screen into a microphone. You may be any number of places, commuting to work, in the car at the school pickup line, or out running errands, at home folding laundry or doing dishes, or maybe out on a run. But the one place we both are not is sitting in an imaginary attic room talking about movies. Today is the finale of the first season of the Film Hobbyist, and I thought I'd take the opportunity to step out of our usual meeting place for a more meta conversation about this podcast, how I pick movies, and what to look forward to when we launch Season 2 next month. First, I need to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the room that is the elephant. Yes, the attic is imaginary. It's based off a few real places, and the furniture is real. My imaginary desk somewhat resembles my real desk in the upstairs office I share with my husband. The forest green futon was a real couch on which I used to watch movies in an attic room. The granny square blanket is also real. One of its squares is actually featured in the logo for this podcast. But the attic is a construct. In episode 6, You Can't Take It With You, A Love Letter from a Lily, I shared my half-joke of a career plan, my teenage answer to the question, how are you going to make money as a writer? Which was, live in my garret and work whichever minimum wage job I can find. A garret being an attic room, the top floor of a building, which once was the cheapest room to rent, as it was coldest in the winter and hottest in the summer. It was the 19th century shorthand for what we would now call being a starving artist. And when I graduated from college, I pretty much lived it out. I got a job at a fast food restaurant making $1 over minimum wage and lived in grad student housing while my husband finished up his master's. I also launched a blog to chronicle my journey, which I titled The View from the Garret. And that's when the garret went from being a joke to almost a mind palace, the place I carried with me. I had thought that the thing keeping me from being a real writer was school. When I finished my degree, I would finally have the time and mental energy to make progress on a second draft of my novel. But the truth was far more complicated. Revision is actually just really hard for me. I spent that entire year working on a single chapter. But when I wrote my blog, I felt like a professional. I felt like a real writer. It felt good to craft words and to publish them on the internet. And then, as life took a number of turns, the garret became coffee shops, places where I could work while our living arrangements took the kind of directions one would expect when one member of a couple is unemployed and the other is working part-time as a barista. And then the garret began to morph into Virginia Woolf's room of one's own, the place that belongs to just me, that allows me to make art. It's part of my business name for my small crochet business. My husband and I used it for the Let's Play channel we ran in 2020. And when I began to sketch out ideas for this podcast, I knew the garret had to be featured. But why a podcast? And why this format? I was pretty late to the party on podcasts. I've never owned Apple products, didn't get a smartphone until 2019, and have also never adopted to use Spotify, so I didn't even begin to understand podcasts as a medium until 2021 or so. But I do understand radio. My family didn't really watch TV growing up. We didn't have cable and really only watched PBS. But we did listen to radio, and I'm not talking about music. Christian entertainment companies at the time were producing some incredibly good fictional radio programs for kids. Adventures in Odyssey, Jungle Jam, and Focus on the Family Radio Theater were absolutely top-notch audio experiences, well-written, well-produced, and well-performed. And then there was also NPR. On Saturday evenings, we would listen to A Prairie Home Companion. I liked the silly skits when I was little, especially the rhubarb pie stories or any that involved the sound effects man. But as I grew older, I learned to appreciate the Lake Wobegon monologues delivered by Garrison Keillor, the funny, often poignant adventures of life in small-town Minnesota. I've been trying to crack film writing since I was in college. Half my pieces for my creative nonfiction class were memoirs of my relationship to film, essentially prototypes of the writing I do here. I was docked several points on one piece for not explaining who Darth Vader was. My professor was Kenyan. I wrote a few pieces of film criticism on my first blog. I've tried doing film reviews and analyses in several different forms. I actually had a Film Hobbyist blog for a minute. I didn't tell anybody about it, just did it to try and feel like I was actually producing something in the real world. But I didn't start pondering a podcast until 2024. I was nursing a baby that year, which is the most boring thing in the world to do. It's being trapped in a chair, fighting a squirming baby, having the literal life sucked out of your body for 20 to 40 minutes straight, 6 to 8 times a day, for an entire year. I watched a lot of anime with my oldest, a lot of cartoons with my second, and a lot of film YouTube with my youngest. And it became really apparent as I listened to and watched podcasts how many of them were produced by mostly men. Nothing wrong with that. I like hanging out with dudes. But it got old after a while. I heard so many of the same takes. And I was really, really hungry for women talking about movies, especially if they didn't just talk about chick flicks. Around the same time, my brother asked my husband to join him on a podcast about video game narratives that a close friend of his had launched. It's called Pages of Play, by the way, and it's very good. I began crafting an idea. I didn't want to do the usual hang out and talk style of podcast. Nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to do something that cared about language and performance. I wanted to build a calm, cozy space for people to leave the exhaustion of the general state of the world and to come think about movies and ideas with me. I thought about the PBS shows I grew up with, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where he invited you into his home to spend time with him, even if that home was a set, or The Study used for Russell Baker's intros to Masterpiece Theater, a comfy armchair next to the fire surrounded by walls of books. And of course, I thought about my garret. I grew up in the Southwest, and we often had mourning doves who nested in the awning to our house. It's a call I really associate with coming home. That's why you hear it at the beginning of each episode. And then you hear me coming down the stairs and opening the door to welcome you to my home, even if that home is imaginary. Now, as for the movies I choose to discuss, I really want to make sure that I'm not trapped into one kind of film. There are odd divisions between movie analyses. I suppose this has a lot to do with audience retention and that kind of thing. And of course, there is taste involved. But as someone who loves movies and a wide spectrum of movies, I didn't want to be stuck with one kind of thing. I do appreciate and enjoy international cinema. I watch a lot of indie darlings. I also enjoy blockbusters. Action is a comfort genre. And while I'm not a huge fan of rom-coms, I have a big soft spot for movies about groups of women living life together. You know, chick flick feel-good dramas. I also really like MGM musicals and screwball comedies, as well as Hitchcock and old Hollywood black and white dramas. If I want to talk to you about film, I don't want to talk about just one thing. I want to talk to you about all of it. And so I've made a conscious effort to try and pick films from a wide variety of genres geared towards different kinds of audiences. I know this affects my audience and listenership. The kind of person who gets excited about Rebel Ridge might, and did, ignore the episode about Uptown Girls. I also think I would be doing a disservice if I picked one over the other. And I would be denying a part of myself as a lover of film in the process. And for those of you who have listened to episodes on movies you've never heard of or wouldn't have watched without prompting, thank you. I myself have learned a lot by watching and listening to others' recommendations. I hope you have experienced the same with mine. While I pick the films very much on instinct, there are two important pieces of structure I have implemented to help myself pick. I want this podcast to talk about the breadth of film. I don't want to get clustered in the 1940s, the 80s, and the 2000s, or to just talk about new movies. So every year, every season, I'm going to build a timeline, starting at or just before the advent of talking film in 1929, all the way to the current year, broken up into 12 mostly equal chunks. And every month, I want to talk about a movie from one of those segments of time. This way, we can cover the span of film history while still bouncing around from genre and audience. Since my podcast releases every 3 weeks, that means some months I release 2 episodes. When that happens, I talk about new movies, the films that are in the zeitgeist. This is why I talked about Wicked and Superman and My Mom Jane. And I think this balance between new and old has worked out really well. I hope it's been enjoyable for you too. I suppose the every 3 weeks schedule is a little odd. Personally, it's given me a good workflow. The script for each episode is about 3,000 words, so I write 1,000 words a week. That's really doable for a single late-night evening writing session or 2 shorter sessions earlier in the day. I finish the script for each episode the day the previous episode releases. Then there are 3 weeks for me to do final revisions on the script and record each episode and for my husband to edit it. This has been a pretty good system. There have been a couple of episodes that haven't fit so neatly into this pattern. Episode 10 on The Last of the Mohicans was a beast of a script to write. It required a ton of research and ended up closer to 4,000 words, so I had to go late on my writing deadline. Thankfully, episode 11 on Sunset Boulevard came together pretty quickly. So what will next season look like? By the time you're hearing this, the script for the season premiere is just about finished. It will release on March 19th, 2026, 3 weeks from today. But what's the difference between season 1 and season 2? Well, for one thing, that timeline has reset. So we'll be talking about a movie from 1994 that isn't The Last of the Mohicans. We'll also be tweaking the intro just a tad after having learned some tricks in the last year. I'd also like to try communicating with you, the audience, a little bit more. I've heard from some listeners that they have delayed listening to certain episodes until they've watched the movies I'm talking about. That's a completely reasonable plan. Sometimes it's because the movie isn't really available to them yet, or because they haven't been in a season to watch particular films. Again, very reasonable. But it occurs to me that knowing the films I'm talking about ahead of time might make it easier to listen to episodes closer to release. Not everyone would be interested in doing this, but I'm sure it might build excitement and just make the show feel more like an event. Part of the conceit of this podcast is that it isn't a podcast. In the podcast world, you are a person physically coming to visit me in an actual physical location. We are having an in-person conversation. To keep that immersion going, it is essential that I not break the fourth wall. That's part of the fun of it all. I could add an addendum to the podcast. Next episode on the Film Hobbyist, we'll be talking about a 1994 women-focused film release. That would be in line with old radio shows, a genre I'm already pulling from. But I don't think it would fit my show. I really like the way the outro leaves the audience with a conclusion, a final thought to ponder over peaceful piano music. Maybe I'll change my mind in the future. But now, I'd like to share that I actually have social media for this whole thing. The Film Hobbyist is on Blue Sky. Has been since launch, actually. I experimented some with posting about upcoming movies online early in the podcast, but I realized that I never had a good place to tell my audience that I had a Blue Sky account. I didn't want to during the episode. It seemed quite gauche, but now we're going to put it in the description for each episode. Blue Sky is a social media you can view without an account, so there's no need to be part of the machine at all if you don't want to. I will post on Thursdays. I will share the upcoming episodes, and I will also work to share what online places, at least in the US, movies are available. Again, I'm a big supporter of libraries too, if that's available to you. Interlibrary loans are pretty amazing. Not great for browsing, but excellent for hunting down specific works. I also want to amend the titles for each episode to include the year of each film's release. They actually are that way in my script documents already, and a couple of episode titles have included the year. In Superman's case, it's entirely necessary, as there's more than one film with that title, but I'm recognizing that the broader audience probably still might find this helpful. Again, this is to help you understand the context I'm bringing to each discussion so you can better participate. I've never wanted this project to be filled with self-promotion or calls to action. Nothing quite breaks immersion like an ad read or a like and subscribe. But yeah, it would be nice if you could subscribe and review the podcast. That would be cool. Also, recommending it to people would be great too. But again, I'm only going to ask this from you here, in this meta space, a behind-the-scenes space. The world is a heavy place right now, especially in my country. There are many terrible things happening that are important to pay attention to. It's hard to know how to care for your neighbors if you don't know what risks they are facing. That being said, we still have to live. We still have to pay bills and acquire food and sleep at night and deal with medical crises, and it's incredibly difficult to do these things if we don't have safe places to escape to. In his seminal essay on fairy stories, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote of fantasy and fairy stories as providing escapism in a positive sense. He took on those who would criticize escapism by arguing, why should a man be scorned if, finding himself in prison, he tries to get out and go home? Or if, when he cannot do so, he thinks and talks about other topics than jailers and prison walls? The world outside has not become less real because the prisoner cannot see it. In using escape in a negative way, the critics have chosen the wrong word. And what is more, they are confusing, not always by sincere error, the escape of the prisoner with the flight of the deserter. I don't want to hide from difficult topics on this podcast. I'm not a sunshine and rainbows kind of person generally. But I do want this to be a place that isn't built on the news cycle. And when I talk about difficult subjects, I want to talk about it from a place of hope and encouragement. I want my attic room to be a place where you come to think and to learn and to appreciate with me, to be filled up, so that when you have to deal with a world of pain, you are doing so after a respite here. I don't want my attic to be a place that sells you things or intentionally rage baits you. Although, when I finally do that episode on why The Godfather isn't a perfect film, I'm not planning on holding back. I want this podcast to be a cozy place where you can leave the trouble of your day-to-day reality to enjoy film and the pleasure of intellectual stimulation. And for those of you who joined me here as part of your life once or twice a month, I say with all sincerity, thanks for listening.